So I saw this story that I wanted to do for the podcast, but it ran into so many issues that I think I need to make a video about the bigger ethical issues around AI and deepfakes. So this story is about high school students who allegedly made AI deepfakes of their female classmates in the buff. They spread it all around, and these female classmates were harassed, and it was really horrible. The kids are in trouble, and law enforcement is figuring out what to do. There are a lot of issues to unpack here, and they really go beyond AI. In fact, AI is just the latest in a long line of tools, starting with Photoshop in the early days of the internet. For some bizarre reason that I never really understood, netizens in the 90s went absolutely ape-funk over Sarah Michelle Gellar. Now, she was really popular, and Buffy was a great show, but really, this was way out of proportion. So this is the days of Usenet, when people were trading pictures of all sorts of things in incredibly complicated ways, but if you knew how to work the software, you could download a JPEG of Gellar in just 20 minutes or so. If you can imagine it, however wonderful or however awful, people were trading pictures of it. So it should come as no surprise that there was a subset of this culture who wanted nudes of Gellar. Now, to my knowledge, Gellar has never posed nude. And given how thorough the internet tends to be about these things, if they couldn't find it, I feel confident in saying it didn't happen. But do you really think they just went, well, okay, I guess I'll just do without? If so, you don't know the internet very well. Yes, people were taking Sarah Michelle Gellar's head in Photoshop and putting it on the body of a nude model. Attempts ranging from the halfway convincing to the laughably pathetic. But they had their fantasies, I guess. The legalities of doing something like this with Gellar are different than doing it with some random woman on the street. Gellar is a public figure, and so for any of this to be legally actionable, something called actual malice has to apply. In short, they would have to try to convince people that these fake nudes were real, and there would have to be a realistic chance of people believing it, enough to cause quantifiable damages. By the way, let me emphasize part of the disclaimer at the start of this video. This is not legal advice. Check your local laws and consult an attorney. So just distributing the nudes wouldn't be enough. Gellar, as a public figure, just has to expect that kind of thing to happen. But if you're not a public figure, it's a different story, and certainly if you're a minor. It gets kind of weird, though. In the United States, the Supreme Court found in Ashcroft v. Free Speech Coalition in 2002 that the sexual depiction of a minor was only illegal if there were an actual minor involved. Adult models playing dress-up, paintings, cartoons, CGI, and other mere depictions of minors without being produced using an actual minor constituted protected First Amendment expression. Otherwise, you'd have to ban Romeo and Juliet, which has a scene where the title characters explicitly consummate their marriage despite their canonical age of 14. Same with film versions by Franco Zeffirelli and Baz Luhrmann that depict actual nudity. But when it's a regular person who's not a public figure, that changes everything, and especially this case where it constitutes harassment of the individuals depicted. In fact, several states explicitly criminalize this regardless of whether or not the person is a minor. Now, regarding AI, fundamentally, the concepts shouldn't change. It actually doesn't matter how convincing the fake appears. Rehnquist had made that argument in his dissent in Ashcroft, but that was rejected by the majority. But also, how easily can you really fake something like this with AI? Let's do a demonstration, but nothing adult so I won't get demonetized. Let's just type in Sarah Michelle Gellar's head on Arnold Schwarzenegger's body, and let's use Stable Diffusion XL, which, as of this video, is the latest and the greatest. Yeah, that's what I got. Yeesh. Okay, so you're at least going to have to do some prompt crafting. But understand, Gellar and Schwarzenegger are well-known celebrities. They had all sorts of pictures of them in the training data. And this is what you get. Seriously, any one of us could do a better job in Photoshop. And this is a best case scenario, but the AI isn't going to have any idea what your next door neighbor looks like. Even if you put in a full description in the prompt, out of hundreds of millions of people in the country, how many people do you think that could describe? Let's try it with me. I put in my description, and this time I did some proper prompt crafting. I also used some different models that work better for headshots. What do you think? How closely do these guys resemble me? Personally, I think I look a lot younger than they do. Maybe I could have put in some more detailed prompting and gotten a lot closer, but you get the idea. In terms of how people think AI works, it really isn't going to be an issue. They didn't say in the story, but kind of reading through the lines, I got the impression that they started with a more traditional Photoshop job and used Stable Diffusion's image-to-image function to enhance it. This is like Photoshop with a more sophisticated toolset, but fundamentally it's the same idea. Using someone else's likeness has all sorts of legal ramifications. Likeness rights aren't absolute. For example, if it's a picture of you in a public place, you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. But if it's something of a sensitive nature, that's a different matter. And then there's all the harassment and abuse involved in this story on top of it. Even if they weren't minors, this would still be, well, pretty major. But it's wrong to blame the tool. Using this as a launching off point to regulate AI is a very bad idea. First of all, you're not going to stop it. This genie is already out of the bottle. Especially with all of the people creating and sharing their own models. Take a look at websites like Hugging Face or Civet AI. People have made a lot of different models for a lot of different purposes, including a disturbing amount of anime. Second, by even attempting to restrict it, you're going to create a free speech dystopia that would make George Orwell screech in shock. Especially since a lot of these tools are open source and run on one's local computer. Without spying on everyone's private data, how are you even going to start to do that? No one saw that I was creating these weird Geller-Schwarzenegger hybrids, and no one would have known I did if I hadn't shared the results with you. So if this were something you wanted to make illegal, how would you even begin? Hypothetical scenario. Let's say someone is using AI to make something you think shouldn't exist, like certain content involving minors. They do it completely on their own computers, keep it to themselves for their own purposes, and don't share it with anyone else. How are you even going to know they've done it? And if you say it's the distribution that's an issue, how much of an issue is that going to be if there's less of a need to distribute it? Because more and more people can create it themselves without having to take the risk of seeking out someone else to get it from. The ramifications of regulation get even more disturbing when you realize the government will be given the power to arbitrarily determine what type of content is good or bad. Even if you're not doing anything wrong, all it takes is some politician to label what you're doing extremist or malinformation or something like that. And then suddenly, you're on the wrong side of the regulations. The only thing regulating AI will do, as all regulations do, is make it so that the big companies can profit while startups get harder to form and open source projects are severely curtailed. All in the name of preventing something that cannot be prevented. What world would you rather live in? One where, like DALL-E and Midjourney and ChatGPT, you're constantly creating with some corporation breathing over your shoulder in a severely crippled and restricted environment? Or an atmosphere of freedom, where your creativity and expression can be unrestrained, absent surveillance and control of narcissistic bureaucrats and corporations? That should be an easy question to answer.